initially with 2023 and the Unbound result and just getting to do a lot of big gravel races, I was kind of like, okay, maybe I've gotten what I came for as far as like, what does trying look like? Like, what does my best of like, you would be good if you tried look like? And then in December, I get a text of keep August 10th free with no contest from Chase. And I figured it out about a day before the official announcement that the Day Across Minnesota was back.
What's going on, everybody? My name is JP, and I want to welcome you to the Stable Cyclist. And if you can't tell, life is a little chaotic right now. School is about to start for me. Soccer season is full swing, and so I'm shooting this intro in my car as I get ready to drive between work at school and getting ready for a soccer match later tonight. And with that, you may have noticed the episodic nature, or the how often episodes are coming out has kind of dropped off a little bit, and that's going to stay that way kind of through the school year now. We'll get back into that every other week rhythm that we had through most of the beginning of the podcast earlier this year. And even through the soccer season, I can't guarantee it's going to be every 2 weeks. We're going to still aim for that, but it might turn into more of a hiatus for a while, because as I'm trying to teach, as I'm trying to coach the soccer team, I still have 5 other documentaries all kind of slowly percolating away and in the works. And so I want to make sure that I'm giving everything the attention I need, most importantly, my family. And so, yeah, I cannot guarantee it'll be every other Friday. It definitely won't be every Friday anymore until next summer. Now, with that said, my guest today is Claire O'Leary. She is the winner of this year's DAM race, the Day Across Minnesota. And you've heard that reference before if you're a regular listener, because Chase Wark is one of the race directors of that race. I actually met Claire back in June after Chase was on the show, and we exchanged some greetings, and I realized she's going to be a potential guest in the future. And she just came off winning the DAM a few weeks ago. This interview actually took place less than a week after the DAM had happened, and so everything's kind of in that timeline in our conversation. Now, one other thing I want to share with you before we get into the interview with Claire. As many of you know, I'm coming off of a really long hiatus from racing on the bike after my accident a year ago, and for the first time this coming weekend on Sunday, I will be racing a bike at Maple Ag, the team that sponsors me. It's actually a resort, and they're the last stop in the Minnesota Mountain Bike Series race series for the year, and I will be racing in the marathon division there, and I'm super excited about it. I have no expectations whatsoever, because it has been kind of a stop-start nature of training this summer, with it being most of my training this summer was just used as rehab therapy for me until I got cleared. So we'll see. It's going to be a lot of fun. But one thing I do know that'll be happening is Flow Formula will be in my bottles and in my hydration pack. Of course, it'll be the high sodium mix, because I sweat pretty much pure salt out of my body, and so I need to replenish it. And if you are prepping for a race, or you're just training, and maybe you're even rehabbing a big injury like I was, Flow Formulas is what you're going to be looking for. And you can use the code JohnPeter15 at checkout to get a discount on your full cart of goodies, and that'll also help me out as well and the podcast. Enough of all that. Enough of you seeing me on the iPhone view instead of the normal studio view. Let's get Claire O'Leary in the studio. So Claire O'Leary, this is exciting, because not only is it another new guest that I get to talk to, but this is a listener and somebody who actually I've interacted with within the podcast realm, and now an athlete that I get to talk to and hear more of your story, which is always really fun. But how are you? How's life in Minneapolis today, and recovery from the DAM going?
I'm good. Right now, we're a week out from the DAM. I still have not cleaned my bike. Recovery is coming along. The first couple of days, I subsisted on caffeine and joy, and actually went for a ride the day after, and then it was a little rougher after that.
Awesome. And we will, for anybody listening that is like, what is the dam? We're going to get all into that later. But Claire, you have a unique story. You reached out to me back I think in June after Chase was on, and we interacted a little bit then, and you shared some of your story. And I just thought at some point Claire's going to get on the podcast. And this past weekend you had a big result, and I was like, this seems like a great time to come and talk to you or to get you on the show. So let's just start off by tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us kind of how you found the bike, and if it takes a while to get your story to the point where you found it, that's totally okay. But yeah, tell us about you. What's your zero to hero story?
Okay, I will try to tell the quick version of this. So I was a runner in high school and college, like cross country and track. Had a bunch of injuries and issues. After college, eventually found like marathoning and then trail and ultra running, and those things escalated the way that they do, and more injuries. And then around like 2018-ish, I had an older brother who lives in New York State, and he was getting really involved with the bike racing scene and also doing timing and stuff like that. And he sent me a postcard that in part said, "Running is dumb, buy a bike and do a real sport." That fall, I was actually in New York City for a work trip and went back home and did a cyclocross race. They had something called Tri-Cross with Nicross. So they brought a borrow a bike fleet to every single race, had a clinic led by FTWs or, a woman rider who just taught you how to not die, basically. And I did my first race that way with no training. I was horrible, and I loved it. And then from there, got connected, came home back to Minneapolis, got connected with the community. But it was still kind of a slow roll. Like, I was still running. I didn't fall in love with the bike right away, really. And then in 2021 was really when I started to flip to really, training on the bike and, having that being my primary thing for a lot of reasons. Wasn't really running anymore. And the rest was history from there.
Okay. So let's dive back into that running past. I'm a former college runner and like a person who was totally in love with it. Tell us, where did you go to college? What kind of events were you doing? What are we talking about? And obviously you said I fell down the rabbit hole of ultra trail running, and that's a never ending rabbit hole, right? That you just it's endless. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about your background with the running.
Yeah, so I ran at Hamline University in St. Paul, so it's Division III. Really liked a lot of the aspects of the co-focus on athletics and academics for D3, and made a lot of great friends and had a lot of great experiences through that. But at the same time, I don't think I ever realized my full potential that I could have either. And then also, so events you asked about, mostly 5K and 10K. So I always kind of gravitated towards the longer thing. Even in high school, when they would read off assignments for track meets, I was the one cheering about being in the 2 mile.
Yeah, right on. My college coach at some point my sophomore year said, "We don't have a race long enough for what you do." And I was a 5K, 10K guy as well. So I totally relate to how you feel and just being is there a 4-hour race that we can do, or, something really long that just we can go suffer in. You said you kind of fell, you didn't really fall in love with the bike at first, but eventually you weren't running anymore. And tell what happened, because you don't fall in love with doing ultra stuff unless you're you really like doing the running events. And then to kind of fall out of love and fall into biking, usually there's something that happens, like a traumatic event, or there's a big injury. So yeah, fill in the gaps there for us.
Not necessarily a big injury, but it was my 9th stress fracture in the summer of 2019. So in 2019, I decided that I was going to do not one, but two 50-mile trail ultras. I do one in May. It's the Ice Age Trail Ultra. It's like my first 50-miler. Like, have a great day, but a horrible recovery out of it. And, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I was in a deep depression hole, and I didn't even actually realize it until we were really far along with that. And then also having, an eating disorder history from high school and college, like, underfeeling just started to happen with all of that. And then, no surprise to have that 9th stress fracture. And it was that was the tipping point for me too, of like, running is fun. I have made so many great friends through it. I met my spouse through running, but at the same time, I can't train the way that I want to for it. And like, maybe this isn't the outlet to really pursue my competitive ambitions anymore.
Sure. Was that, aside from everything else that you just described that was going on, how hard was that mentally to go through that transition, to just come to terms with, even though you were clearly miserable because of what was going on? I know me personally, when I finally had to make the decision, like, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep running, even though I love it. I had a torn plantar at that time. I'd had a femoral stress fracture. Like, my body was done with running, and it had been miserable for like 2 years, and I still had this like very heavy, like, it was like a death almost. What was it like for you to transition and to come to that realization that I just can't do this anymore?
I think the pandemic really helped. So in that like slow fade of like not doing anything either, I actually hadn't signed up for any races in 2020 because I was going to get married and like, I'm just going to chill out. And I did, some fun runs still. I got taken to the ER after a 30-mile fun run on the Superior Hiking Trail just because of a dehydration incident. But so it was definitely still running. And then, coming into 2021, the one friend who I would like meet up and run with from like across the sidewalk, because this is still deep in the pandemic, she got pregnant with her second kid. And then so was running less or not running as much too. And then from there, the biking started to come in more, and it was kind of this like gradual shift out.
Okay, right on. You mentioned that like post that monster 50-miler that you did, and some trail runners I know are going to listen to me say monster 50-miler and they're going to roll their eyes because I got friends doing like 200-milers, which is a whole nother level of dumb. But you did a big 50-miler, and you said it put you in a big hole, and you didn't realize it. Talk about like, how did that happen? And then I always want to hear like, how did you get out of it? And because usually we fall down that hole a lot further than we think, and all of a sudden, how do I get back out? You don't just say like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Like, there's usually some steps. So what happened to get you there, or where you really noticed it, and then how did you get out?
The getting into the hole. So I think in the lead up to the race and some of the like anxiety and prep, like looking back, I've realized, I was starting to slip in depression and didn't, fully put it together because, everything else is going on. And of course I'm, focused on the race and everything. And then from the race, I think the next, like 4 days later, I had to fly to California for work, and I got sick. And then I was working with a coach at the time who was just like, okay, you're going to do a workout like the week after, and like we're going to jump right back into it because, the next one is only 8 weeks away, and like we're going to get right back in. And I was not ready for that. Like, I was pretty banged up. So kept like pushing it. And, got to the point where I just absolutely hated it and would like cry on the side of the trail, and was, still dealing with nagging injuries because I didn't respect the recovery. And and then when I finally did get the stress fracture, and having had so many, like you have those couple days of denial, and then it's like, yeah, like I don't even need to MRI this. Like, I know. from there, I was almost relieved to be like, this is a hard reset. I'm just gonna like paddleboard and chill and, not worry about what the next thing is. Like, I'm just gonna take my time now.
Yeah. So you start cycling. It is kind of allows you to do a reset. At what point do you realize, like, I'm not just doing this, I really like it, and I maybe need some goals? Because, like, if you're like me, you spend your whole life running, and you're setting goals and trying to race because you need something to train for. Now you're doing a different activity. The first thought that for those of us that are like competitive athletes, we think, where's the competition we're working towards? So kind of what was the progression there from like, well, I'm riding bike a little bit to let's go do a race?
Honestly, it was a reverse progression of like, I jumped headfirst into like, let's race cyclocross and not even know how to do a running mount before I had even like ridden 50 miles. Like, I ran 50 miles long before I ever rode 50 miles. Okay. So for me it was, and then when I gradually figured it out and did more during the pandemic too, of just like training and spending a little bit more time on the bike, I had a local coach in Minneapolis say to me, you would be good if you tried. But I didn't know, like, in hindsight, I know they meant it well, but I didn't know what trying looked like because there are so many little differences between biking and running. And that made me so upset because I didn't know how to try and I was trying to figure it out. And it took a little bit of spinning my wheels to get there.
Yeah. Those when you're such a grinder in the distance events, when somebody says something like that to you, it can come off as pretty offensive because essentially you're telling us we're lazy. But you're right, there's so many nuances in biking that like, and you maybe are trying, but you're not doing it right. And so you're doing all of the extra work you don't need to. What was the first time you said it took a long time for you to hit 50 miles? Mm-hmm. And when did you start to realize, like, cyclocross, for those that aren't as familiar, it's this winterish sport taking place. The races are like 40 to 45 minutes to an hour maybe. It is full on, like, bleed out of your eyes. It's so hard. You're running, you're carrying your bike, you're going over stuff. How do you get from there to like start finding that there isn't a race long enough for me? Because where you have become really successful, you have like a third place at Unbound last year in the open division. And then you just won the Dam, which literally is a ride across the state of Minnesota horizontally. Those are big days. You didn't just go from cyclocross to that. When did you start to like kind of walk into the water and say, this is kind of fun to do this really long stuff and I'm good at it?
Ooh, that's tough. I think I always had like a hunch that I would maybe be good at the long stuff, but I was just a little bit scared off of it on the bike. I did my first century in April of 2022. It was at Ragnarok, which is probably one of the toughest gravel races in Minnesota. So early April, you send a postcard in. The weather is usually disgusting. That was probably a strong choice as a first century. And then I won.
Yes. Oh, wow. Okay. Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah. It was an absolute gross weather day. Not as bad as the day that it like snowed 9 inches the night before though. Yeah.
Yeah. That race never has nice weather. It's where it is in April, and then the course is pretty gnarly. Mm-hmm. Who prepared you to go and actually survive that thing as a first long race? Who were the people around you that were like, this is what you got to do? Because like, that's not like you said, that's a cannonball in.
Well, I kind of wung it. At the same time, I had actually just gone to an Amy D Foundation gravel camp. So Amy D Foundation, if you're not familiar, is it was founded after Amy Dombrowski, who was a pro cyclocrosser for the U.S., who died in a training accident in 2013, I believe. And they started a foundation to really boost women in cycling at all levels from that. If you look over the years, they've had numerous like road development squads and the pro cyclocross squads, and you look at who was on those teams, and it's kind of the who's who of who's gone on to Conti and Women's World Tour teams, like people like Megan Jastrab even. So they also, in 2022, decided they were going to do a gravel camp to really not only reach like the true elite level, but help pull up from beginner to elite too. So they had that in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. So it was a totally free experience too. All I had to do was get my bike and myself out to Virginia. And it was absolutely incredible. Like, I'd never descended a mountain before, and I think that was such a huge boost in confidence, too, that I'm like, okay, yeah, I can wing this thing for Ragnarok.
Yeah. Yeah, so you get to the finish line and you win. Was that where you were like, okay, I think I should do more of these and I think I can do it? Or did it take you some time to like process what just happened?
Yes to both, but yeah, from there, I think like a lot of things had already like closed and I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I did Gravel Worlds 150 in 2022, and that was the year they had the women start at the front, and they had done the 1,000 Women of Gravel thing, which was an initiative to get more women to line up from pro to amateur in all distances that they offered. And there must have been 35 women at the front, and we got to lead the race out of town, and it was a super cool experience.
Yeah, so, and we hear Gravel Worlds, and we hear Day Across Minnesota, and we hear all these Minnesota gravel things, and I know that if people have been paying attention on this show, they're going to be like, this sounds kind of like stuff that Chase Wark has talked about. And that's where I love the longer I do this, everybody cross paths at some point. And Chase Wark comes into your life as your coach. At what point in this progression?
Yeah, so in August 2021, Chase was just starting Wark Cycling Services. So his business of like the combo of the Airbnb and coaching and the events. And he posts like, oh, I'm just kind of a blanket Instagram post. And I knew who he was because he ran a cyclocross race out of his parents' yard. Yes, but we had like never really talked and never really interacted. So I'm like, and this is at the same time that like You Would Be Good If You Tried was kind of like still grinding at me. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is trying to take all of like the like track running workouts and do them on the bike is not necessarily the right thing. Like, let's see how this goes. So I chat with Chase on the Friday afternoon before the dam. He is hanging out in Gary, South Dakota, which there's not a lot there, getting ready to spend all night riding his bike. And I'm like, well, he's a little off. Like, I knew that anyone who would ride across the state on a disc wheel was a little weird, but I figured I would give it a go. And he really has shown me over the years, like, how to do a lot of work and how to find a lot of joy in it. And I think over time, kind of becoming friends, too. Yeah,
absolutely. He definitely has a unique view on how to look at the sport and enjoy it and make sure you're enjoying it while you do it. And, so last year you go to Unbound, you have a big result there. You get third in the open field. As you're planning for this year, what was kind of on your mind for what are the big boxes that you wanted to check? And I kind of want to like let people in on like how you would work with a coach to then move through your year. especially since now they have a reference point for you and for Chase of like, hey, this is what the relationship actually works like.
Yeah, so initially with 2023 and the Unbound result and just getting to do a lot of big gravel races, I was kind of like, okay, maybe I've gotten what I came for as far as like, what does trying look like? Like, what does my best of like, you would be good if you tried look like? And then in December, I get a text of keep August 10th free with no contest from Chase. And I figured it out about a day before the official announcement that the Day Across Minnesota was back after a 2-year hiatus. So the last dam had been in 2021, and then now it was back. And because I was just getting into the sport in 2021 and had after that discovered I was really talented at the longer distances, I always kind of felt like I was a little bit of a fraud that I hadn't done the dam. Like, people would always ask me and I'd be like, well, no, I haven't done it. So when I found out it was back, like, that was very clearly like the A++ race of the season.
Yeah. So then how did you work with him to set up your year? Because, I mean, it's not like you're going to do that race and then turn around this coming weekend and race again and then race. Like, it's a monster that you kind of have to prepare for and then allow your body to like absorb it. So how did you and Chase go about setting up your year?
I think I created like a color-coded Google Sheets calendar, but kind of, deciding I really wanted to go for that. Like, I had kind of also pinned the season around Lutsen 99er on the North Shore, and from there just filling in smaller things, but also taking life into account, being like, yeah, I might really want to do this race on this weekend, but, going to that family thing is more important, and really figuring out the give and take. For instance, like, I really wanted to do Hungry Bear in Wisconsin, but it's the same weekend as Mother's Day, and being like, this isn't the best call. It'll still be there. And then instead for Mother's Day, I rode 110 miles to my mother-in-law's house.
That sounds like a better option. You get best of both worlds then. Hey folks, real quick, if gravel racing and historic views are for you, then head to Bismarck in October for the Alchemist Gravel Fest. North Dakota, classically known as the Flatlands, is correct in eastern Dakota, but once you hit central North Dakota and the Missouri River, the landscape, well, it changes dramatically. And you can have your breath taken away by the views, just like Lewis and Clark did when they passed through over 200 years ago. October 5th this year, racers will race the Alchemist Gravel Fest in Mandan, North Dakota. Racers will start in Grainer Park south of Mandan and climb their way out of that Missouri River Valley onto the bluffs of Morton County. 55-mile course will test you with minimum maintenance roads, fast descents, some of the longest climbs around, but your efforts will not go unrewarded as the views are absolutely spectacular. And after the dust has settled, there will be awards to be had and hot off the grill food for everyone. Not up for a 55-mile race? Don't you worry. They've got you covered with the Elixir, a 30-mile version of the course that is just right for everyone. Additionally, there is camping available at the start-finish, and if you live in the Midwest, seriously, you can't go wrong heading to Bismarck, North Dakota, and their amazing bike scene for this race. This race is hosted by 701 Cycle and Sport, and I can tell you from a lot of experience, the crew at 701 know how to host an amazing race and put on a great time. There's a link to the Alchemist event in the episode description, or you can check it all out yourself at 701cycleandsport.com. Let's talk about the dam. And like you know, as a listener, I'm not interested in like some wild race winning move or how, and in a 200 and however many mile race, the race winning move is more like watching two snails get away from each other if we're really honest about things. But I want to hear about mentality. That is a race that starts in, like you said, Gary, South Dakota. It finishes in the first town in Wisconsin that you get into. It is literally a single shot, point to point. You start at midnight, is that correct?
Correct. You have there are fireworks going off along the side of the road, and the fire truck leads us out of town.
And and you're in the dark for the first 7 hours, 6.5?
5.5.
5.5? Okay. I train a lot in the dark, especially in the past. That doesn't scare me. But what is that like to not do it for just like 2 hours, but like, hey, we're going to literally ride through the night?
The dark part was so fast, and it was a huge tailwind day last week. So, and it's sandy and downhill and fast, and it was slightly terrifying and thrilling. And like, I think everyone kind of looked at their average speed and be like, wow, we are flying. It is either going to be an epic day or I am going to blow up spectacularly. But the temps were cool, and the stars were out, and the night was clear. And then for those first 60 or 70 miles, I was with a huge group. So honestly, like every time my mind would drift, all I thought about, I would kind of like try to snap myself back to like here and now. Like only things that matter are eating and the wheel in front of me. At mile 70-ish, Chase is out at the corner. And at this point, I didn't actually know I was leading the women's race. Like I had a hunch, but just the nature of mass starts, you never know. Like everything is so chaotic in those first couple miles. Someone slips up the side of the road. You miscount who's in front of you. Like it happens. So he like kind of shines a light in my face to realize it's me. And he's like, Claire, want an update? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you're winning. And then I kind of take a turn, and I'm just off the front with my teammate Nick, who was doing the double dam, which is not only going to Wisconsin, but then riding back. And Nick is like such a talented ultra distance runner and super quiet. And he just fist bumps me in the night. And that's the last I see of him, really, of like we get separated from there. But for both of us, that was our favorite moment of the whole race because we just both knew we were on one.
Yeah, you mentioned staying present. And I know in these ultra endurance events, like it's probably your most important skill that you need to practice. And what does that look like? Like when you're in the group, aside from just like the constant mantra of like eat and drink, because it's an eating and drinking contest in those long races. But are you taking in the stars? Are you looking around as the sun comes up, or are you like, to you, does staying present mean I'm so dialed on my competitors or whatever I have right in front of me? Where does finding the joy come from in that setting?
So everyone had mentioned, like, look at the stars. So I did make a couple of, like, intentional moments of, like, if we were crossing a paved road or something and it was, like, kind of like a little ease up moment, like, I did make sure I looked around. And especially when the sun was very first starting to come out as you're coming out of the Minnesota River Valley, and now I'm not in a huge group anymore either, like, taking all of that in was really cool too. And I did try to like take a moment for it. But I think for me, sometimes I start thinking about super random things like what I'm going to make for dinner next week. And it's like, no, you need to watch that wheel because this is how you miss the move.
Yeah, for sure. As you get into that race, you mentioned earlier, I had a group I was with, and then my friend Nick was just gone. How much of that race were you by yourself?
I was only truly alone for about 30 miles. I got caught in some loose stuff and went over the bars at mile 100. I was fine, but the group was gone, and there was no way I was going to be able to chase back to them by the time I got back on my bike. So I was alone for quite a while, and that's when I figured out how spread out things were too. Just that there weren't a lot of it. There wasn't a group right behind me either. But for the most part, especially in the later miles, I would ride with another rider here or there, or like catch up to other riders too. And there was just so much great camaraderie out there.
Yeah. I'm always curious when I talk to athletes, when you get in those times by yourself and you do start thinking about your, cooking lists for the week or whatever, what are you saying to yourself to keep yourself back, get on track? And also, like, what are you just trying to think about to stay on track? Is it mantra stuff, or is it just like empty-headed riding and making sure you're doing your job?
I think later in the race especially, I was really thinking of like, okay, 30 miles until the next checkpoint and I get to see my people, and then 40 miles to the finish. So breaking it up of like, it's 30 and then 40, not 70.
What are those checkpoints like? Because even if you're with a group of people, you do have some camaraderie with them, those times by yourself can get pretty lonely. What is it like coming into those aid stations or those checkpoints where you get to actually see your people that know you personally and have your goodies for you? Tell us about the emotions of that.
Honestly, it was so quick, I didn't truly get to soak it in. Someone was split timing my stops, and I spent less than 6 minutes actually at aid stations across the
so
three
impressive.
across the day.
That's so impressive.
But, it was great because I would come in and, it'd be like, what do you need really quick? And it was just so great to hear their voices too. And, trying to get information, like asking for time gaps too. I found out after the fact that they were lying to me about the time gaps. Like, I left aid station 3 and I was riding away and I asked what the gap was, and they said 5 miles. And my friend who yelled that had just been chatting to a stranger and had told her 10. And that was what the actual gap was.
Sure.
And she just looked at him and looked at me riding away, and I think just like shook her head. Yeah.
When you look at like, I don't know if you have a power meter on your bike, and I don't want to get into the grim details of that. But like when you look at your numbers from that day, were they kind of like mind blowing to you, or were they where you expected, or like you've never done an effort like this, but you probably with Chase have extrapolated what it could have been or what it would have thought it would be. What did it end up being like in comparison to what maybe you thought you were capable of?
It was right around on par as far as like power, and like the power also didn't drift off that far later in the day too. So I would I wasn't looking at averages overall, but I would look down occasionally at it and be like, oh, this isn't bad. Like, even at mile 200, still like going up this hill above threshold. So, that was a nice little thing to see. I did look at the heart rate data after the fact. I didn't have heart rate on my head unit at all, but my heart rate was so high for that night section. I thought it was so funny of just, 170 for a couple of hours. And I'm really glad I didn't look at that number, because I think I would have convinced myself I was redlining.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably a combination of just like your brain was trying to process things at a more stressed out level than normal, rather than maybe the effort you were putting out. And so, yeah, incredible. And just, congrats on a huge day. It's always fun when we can find those depths that we haven't really gone to before and just get through them. And so the last thing, Claire, I want to there's two things I still want to talk about. You mentioned earlier that for a while you, and maybe still do, struggled with disordered eating or an eating disorder. It was one of the first things when we had started interacting back in June that you just like, hey, this is kind of who I am, and boom, this topic. And so I'm like, okay, like she is open to talking about this and we're going to talk about it. But how has that played into everything? Because the ultra endurance world is, I believe, rife with people who are all struggling with it. Just a lot of people don't want to admit that they struggle with it, because the goal to look skinny and be super fast with watts per kilo is such a alluring thing for everyone, and that is a slippery slope. So yeah, share your story. Speak your truth, Claire.
Okay, I'm going to start out with watts per kilo is bull. And it is one of those things that, like, I have made a conscious effort not to really put any credence in, because just for me, I know it's the slippery slope, and, like, I'm okay with just not worrying about it, and we don't live in the mountains anyway. But as far as my story with all of that, like, gosh, going back to, high school track and being in a very competitive team environment. At one point, I think we were top 10 US for cross country. Like, it was pretty crazy what New York high school cross country for girls was like, in the mid-aughts and stuff. But it was you put a bunch of type A competitive people together, and with that mantra of, like, lighter is faster, and especially everything with running, and things festered to a point, and I definitely took them to a extra point of under fueling, like, going into, like, using restricting kind of as like an outlet to in a very negative and healthy way. And by the time I got to college, I'd already had, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 stress fractures, like, had gone, like, really far down that trail. And no one had really caught it, or no one with enough authority, like, for me being a minor too, had caught it enough. And, I think it was, like, stress fracture 5 or 6 then, as a freshman in college, where there was a sports medicine resident who was kind of like, this isn't normal, this isn't okay. I was really resistant at first to help, and it was kind of a sorted thing from there. Like, things got worse before they got better. But eventually it got to, come back to the track team and come back to competing. And that was honestly one of the most rewarding moments of college for me. But kind of skipping way ahead, like, I wouldn't be here where I am right now, like, doing ultra bike races, if I wasn't in a really good spot. Like, I'm really honest with, like, myself and the people around me. Like, I need to do this the right way. And that's kind of why I've kind of gone headlong into bike racing the way I have, is, like, I wanted that second shot of, like, what does it look like to really fuel myself and treat my body alike, and, like, how far can I go if I do it the right way?
How did you learn how to do that? Like, obviously identifying, like, that this is a huge issue is one thing, but then learning the way back out that's really hard. Who taught you that? How did you learn it?
The short versions, like therapy, rehab, and also worked with a really cool sports dietitian. Her name was Rasa Troop, and at the time I was working with her, she had just competed in the Beijing Olympics for Lithuania in the steeplechase. And she was also slightly open about, like, her eating disorder history. She worked at an eating disorder clinic, but also worked with the University of Minnesota women's track team too. So was, like, really immersed in that field and kind of knew the coaches. And frankly, I was a little scared of her. So she taught me a lot too about balancing, like, everything at first was about, like, intuitive eating and, like, resetting hunger and fullness cues and all of that. And then, like, once I was back to, like, working out with the team and racing, I remember one point it was kind of like, yeah, throw it all out. Like, you can't do sports nutrition, like, intuitive eating style. It, like, doesn't work. So from there, it was a lot of like snacks stuck in my like spike bag for like right after workouts. And like, honestly, that was more than a decade ago. And I still use like little tricks that she taught me.
Yeah. Once what was the timeline, or like how long a time are we talking between when you were like, I need real help and I'm going to start getting help? And you said, you met this steeplechaser and you worked with a therapist, but like people don't just, and this is the same when we talk about mental health, right? And people are like, oh, I got diagnosed with depression. And then I got diagnosed with bipolar, and I tell people, and a year and a half later, I kind of felt like my life finally was straightened out. Like for you, getting your life back on track with eating, which is like literally fueling life, how long did that take for you to get to where you were like, I got my hands back around this?
So that fifth or so stress fracture that I mentioned would have been like winter of my freshman year of college, and like kind of started to like suss out like what actually feeling would look like maybe this actually is an issue. Went home for the summer. Things got pretty bad. Honestly, came back to school of like sort of a planned intervention, not really staged in quite the best way, but it was really clear that things had gone really downhill. And then from, it was basically that entire year until I was like really back in a good spot of like, okay, you can work out with the team, you can run with the team, and like, seeing it was not only the eating part, but also the running too, and learning how to balance both of those things.
Yeah, and I think that's so. I ask that because, like I said, so many people don't understand how much of a long game fixing any of these situations is. Whether it is with eating, whether it is like if you're dealing with obesity and trying to take care of that, it's a long game, like really long. If you're trying to get your mental health in order, you got to play the long game and be patient and just do the work. And the people around you that are professionals will help you get in the right place, and eventually you can be running again, or you can be, in my case, feeling like life is normal-ish. Or I have a good friend who's lost a ton of weight in the last year to get healthy again, but it's taken a year. And so I just always like to remind people and hear people's stories when they're trying to come out of that darkness or those holes, that this is a really long time, but it's so much better when you make it out. And when you get to start running with your teammates again, or you get to start racing, or you get to do whatever, it's so worth it, and it's so much better, and your quality of life moving forward is just amazing. The last thing, Claire, I want to ask you about is the Driftless Gravel Camp, and I'm really intrigued. But I'm intrigued by it anyways. That's what you initially reached out to me about. Chase and I mentioned it in his first time on this podcast, and then as you were talking, I'm listening to you. You're talking about these FTW situations with cyclocross where women are coming and helping you, and then you go to this Dombrowski gravel camp and how influential that was on your life, and all of a sudden a few years ago you start this Driftless Gravel Camp, and I'm going to let you take it from there with the progression, and again how like at some point in here Chase gets involved with it. And yeah, like tell us all about it, and share your heart on why this has been so important to you.
Okay, I will try to make this succinct. So April or March 2022, I go to the AMD gravel camp, and I come home and I'm like, this was such a cool experience. I want to do something like that here. And the idea is kind of batting around my head all year. And then when I make my my spreadsheet for race calendar for 2023, I'm doing this like, in the late fall of 2022, I put a line away at the bottom that said Gravel Camp 2.0 ? And Chase sees that the fact that he made it to like line 50 was absolutely incredible. But he sees that and texts me like, that's a cool idea. You should do it here. I'd love to help. Something like that. So it kind of goes from there, and I had a lot of help from other people with experience promoting events and in the bike space, of finally deciding, like, I don't know what the funding is going to look like. I don't know how this is going to work, but I want to try. So the first year we had 12 FTW riders come to Winona for the weekend of a totally free experience to like learn skills, get experience, build community. And it was really incredible. It was so much work. I had some key help, but like a lot of it was me, building a website at 11 p.m. on the couch and like trying to figure out insurance paperwork and like everything in between.
All the parts of a business that suck.
But it wasn't even a business.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So that brings us to 2023. I, to some extent, took a step back. Another woman named Claire Meldrum helped step in as that lead and like the person who was doing the insurance permitting and things like that. And I got to spend more time on my bike this year. So the 2024 camp, we had 15 riders for the whole weekend. And I got to work with the advanced group. And for some of them, the long ride we did on Saturday was their longest ride ever. And it was really rewarding to see that. One rider found out I had the QOM on a descent and decided she was going to go get it. And I've never seen a smile that big, but I was so terrified because we were going like 30 miles an hour downhill on gravel on this like tight, windy road. But it was really cool to be able to build a space where people could feel like they could ask those dumb questions. It wasn't just the riding that we did either. We also this year had 7 weeks of Zoom sessions where we got experts from all over to like talk about gear ratios, talk about fueling on the bike, talk about, how do you plan a gravel route, like everything and anything. And that was really powerful too.
I said I only had 2 questions left. I actually have a few more, Claire. And because I just keep thinking of things that I want to talk about. Your whole camp exists to get FTWs, and explain to people what FTW stands for. It's not for the win. It has a different meaning in this context. Yeah. What are we talking about?
So trans women and also non-binary, really a way to be more enveloping to anyone who's not a cis dude, which is an overwhelming amount of people on bikes, especially at bike races.
Yeah, and that's my real question is aside from camps like this, and maybe things like this are the answer, but how do we get more not men across the bridge that is to bike racing? Because like I was just out 2 weeks ago with my film crew. We filmed the Madahe 100. It's the second year in a row we've been out there doing long form documentary work. And there was a point in the day where I took a lot of flack for not following any women's leaders, and we were following the men. And I said, listen, 2 years ago, there weren't women finishers. Last year, nobody started. And this year, there's 2, I believe, and neither of them were able to finish. And I want to see more women at a race like that. I want to see more women and non-dudes, we'll just say, everywhere. And how do we make that happen?
I wish I knew the full answer. I think the part of the answer that I have keyed in on or tried to work in with is confidence and competence. So like just feeling like you can do it, and I have so many times been the only woman to show up at a fast group ride with 30 men. And even as I gained more experience, I would just have my stomach go to the floor when we were about to roll out and I realized I was the only one. So just building that confidence that, you have just as much skill and experience and fitness, and you can do this even if you are going to go out there and be vastly outnumbered. And then also just the raw knowledge, because I think like it can be really scary to like ask that question, or even go into the bike shop and like ask about gear ratios and not feel dumb. So like creating a space to ask all those questions and kind of get that knowledge base too.
Yeah, if people want to know like where to easily see mansplaining happen, go into a bike setting where someone that's not a dude comes in and asks a question, and it's downright embarrassing at times how the talking down to occurs, and it's not going to grow the sport. That's ultimately, like any of these things we're talking about, whether it's this gravel camp or like I was this past weekend in Minneapolis for Black Bike Week, and a lot of people are like, why do we need Black Bike Week? And I'm like, because when I go to a race, the only people I see look like me, and it's not anything wrong with the white people that are there, but we want other people to ride bikes too, because it's awesome and it's changed our lives. And it's the same thing with, I don't want this to be a dude party wherever I go race, because it's changed my life and it's changed your life. And so we want other people to come and experience that change with us. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now, Claire. But it's very frustrating when people try to watchdog and gatekeep this amazing community, because it is such a life-changing thing to do.
Yeah, my one final point on that is before the race, someone else pointed out that there were 53 women signed up for the women's open field for the dam, plus a handful of others in like non-binary and like women's fat bike. And they were like, wow, that's absolutely incredible. Like in 2021, we had less than 10. And my first response was like fire emoji, like absolutely. But then I crunched the numbers and I'm like, no, there are 520 people on that start list. So that's like 12%. Like we need to keep our foot on the gas to get, like, you know, it might never be 50-50 in my lifetime, but really, you know, we can't say 10% is acceptable either.
Exactly. All right, a few more lighter questions here to end things that you might have known are coming, and I have a new one for you. If we go on a gravel ride, and like some people when I talk to them, I'm like, I'm never going to go on a gravel ride with this person because you live in North Carolina or whatever. But there's a good chance at some point our paths will cross between our relationship with Chase and just being in proximity in the great state of Minnesota. Where are we going on a gravel ride if you can go anywhere and we go on a ride together and it's your route?
I am going to say near my hometown in upstate New York. My parents live a few miles from like the Erie Canal, and it might not be like true gravel riding, but you can ride the towpath for miles and miles and miles. And just wind through all of these like villages lined with, you know, buildings from the 1700s and like the apple orchards. And like lately I've made it back there in the fall and be like, oh, I hit like 11 villages on this ride and got to ride along the Erie Canal. And I didn't ride when I lived there, so it's really cool to be able to like go back and see what an incredible place for riding it is.
That sounds truly amazing. I like anything in the United States that feels old, because most of it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, next question. You have a hard workout in front of you from one Chase Wark, and you this doesn't matter if you're on Zwift or wherever you are, indoors on a trainer or outside. If you have music on, what is one song that has to be in your playlist? You cannot ride without it.
Mr. Brightside.
Okay, right on. That's the second mention of that song in this podcast, so that's incredible. Wow, I did not know where that was going to come out of the holster, but that's amazing. Okay, last question. We're on this bike ride in New York, and we're going to stop at a gas station. And we're not stopping at Chase's Quick Trip where they have everything you want. We are like in some rural town of 50 people, maybe Gary, South Dakota style size town. So what are your go-to items, food and drink in this gas station that you're going to get?
So the Quick Trip of upstate New York is this gas station chain called Stewart's, and they have the best hard serve ice cream you have ever had in your life. Like Vermont dairy, 30 flavors at every single shop, absolutely incredible. So I'm probably going to get a cookie dough ice cream and a thing of root beer.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, Claire, this has been awesome. And so many of your answers I've been like, man, we are like long lost friends. You think a lot of the lines that I do, and when you said colored spreadsheets, I was, we're homies for life right there. So yeah, thank you for your time, Claire. This was short notice to get you on this one, especially after the dam, but I knew that I could probably pull it off, and it's been just amazing hearing your story today and getting to know more about who you are. Where can people find you, Claire, if they want to follow along from here?
The best place is probably Instagram. I'm at allcontent_ no context. That one is actually because my job is as a writer and a content creator for a corporate software company. So a little bit of play on that, and a little bit of a play on I tell stories by jumping in and forgetting huge key details. And then you can also follow me on Strava.
Okay, right on. Right on. Well, Claire, thank you for your time today, and thank you for being you and being honest with everybody in a way that's going to help all of us move forward.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for hanging out today on the Stable Cyclist Podcast. Do me a favor, and if you are not subscribed or following along, go ahead and do that, please. And also leave a thumbs up or a 5-star rating on the applications that you are listening to us or watching us on. And more important than anything, in the chaos of what is our lives right now in this season, especially for me, remember to reach out to those around you, and remember that you are loved.